So where?
We are live, James.
And he's immediately frozen.
Oh my God, this is absolutely shocking. Right, okay. Shall I just remove him, Greg? First of all,
give him a chance. We'll keep talking. I'm sure
I'm going to introduce it. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Shida Rats podcast. I don't know what number it is because I don't do this. James does this.
It's not your department, Paul. You're not paid to be clever.
I'm not. No, I'm not paid at all. So what's happened is James, look at his stupid little face.
The spinny circle of doom. Oh, but he's back.
Unfortunately, he's back. So I'm going to explain.
That at that moment, we drove into the middle of nowhere.
Okay, I'm going to explain what's going on, everyone. So,
guys, as you can probably tell, I'm travelling in the back of.
How he's going? I'm taking him off. Right. Anyway, he's gone. He's gone because. Right. This is what's happened. So James was supposed to be here tonight. James didn't tell me that he was going to be travelling up to Manchester and back in the same day, which I'm guessing for James is what, Greg? What, 4 hours each way?
Comfortably, especially through the time that he has travelled in the day here in the UK.
So it's about 4 hours each way from James's house, I would say. So James has grossly underestimated his journey, and
ever the optimist.
So Grigar Farrar has joined us.
Mm-hmm. Good evening, guys, viewer.
Yeah, good evening, Greg. So Greg, you guys might remember Greg came on. You came on a few weeks ago, I'd say.
It's just around Christmas time, wasn't it? Since which time I've spent more time in Wales than I have in my own home and in the east of England where I live. So yeah, it's been a few weeks. Nice to be back and attempt to fill the breach left by Jivey.
Well, mate, you'll easily do it. You're like a better looking version of Jivey. So quite exciting today. We've got Mason from Vertex Effects coming on a bit later on. Mason's going to come on whenever he's ready, actually. So probably around about 9 o'clock. But if Mason comes on earlier, even better, or just whatever time he wants. But
yes, in the presence of royalty, they can do what they like, can't they?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Also, well, I could say something else, but let's not get political too soon.
No, let's not. So who's in the house? We've got Dave McQuillan's in the house. David's in first, actually. David from the Highland Plectrum Company. David Stockton. Evening, David. Pet's in the house. Lee Abraham and Safe is in the house. Jeff Rock is in the house. And Jeff Rock's got a question. Yeah, he said, evening, guys. Has anyone tried DiMarzio 36th anniversary PAFs? I've got Iron Gear Blues engines in my PRS. Fancy putting a double cream pickups in a black Les Paul Classic. IG, don't do double cream. Hey, I'll tell you what, we've got something to show you about double cream a bit later on, haven't we? Greg sent me a picture.
Yes, I've got some.
That sounds a bit wrong, doesn't it?
Yeah,
it's not that sort of picture.
Yeah, almost the watershed. Are we going to jump into Jeff's question straight off the bat, or do some more hellos and come back to it?
Mate, you're in charge tonight. I don't care. I'm here for the looks. I'm not.
Well, look, I think we'll just continue to say hello to everybody as and when we get through it. But yeah.
Oh, well, let's do this. Okay.
What thoughts then? So first up, 36 years of DiMarzio.
Is that what it is?
Saying 36th anniversary, perhaps, isn't he? Wow.
That
36
is crazy.
years. So I can't even think, but how old is the Gem by comparison then? Presumably they went in pretty early.
Gem's got to be 1988, I'm guessing, 89, something like that, I would have thought.
Green meanie out the window and say hello, Gem.
Yeah, I'd say it's around that sort of time. Some of the worst sounding pickups I've ever heard in my life in the Gem. But the thing is, that's the thing. The thing about that particular guitar is that, and this is what happens when you buy
signature
guitars, because they're specific to that particular person, that particular tone. Yeah. Someone else picks it up and they're expecting to get their sort of sound out of it. Now I found Gem pickups like thin. So thin. So
fair shout about the signature element of it as well. I as a youth was enormously into Extreme and specifically Nuno Betancourt's playing.
Now that's the tone.
astounding, absolutely remarkable.
There's a difference. There's a massive difference. I mean, to me, I mean, if you listen to Betancourt's tone, unbelievable tone.
Yeah,
ridiculous.
And you can argue it's in the fingers and all the rest of it.
Yeah, but Vi's tone. I mean, I like Vi. Don't get me wrong. He was a player. But tone, one's a tone monster, and the other one's
yeah. The Betancourt thing that springs to mind is the first time he managed to get his hands on Eddie Van Halen's rig, and he said that he was distraught at the fact that he played it and he sounded like him rather than EVH. So yeah, for Vi to get the sounds that he does out of those pickups, we mere mortals pick one of those things up, and how much of it is psychosomatic and how much of it is they do a thing for him but not for anybody else.
Yeah,
not for many other people.
But going back to the I've never tried the anniversary paths. It's interesting, like how different their anniversary paths. A path's a path. Do you know what I mean? It was a specific type of pickup and sound.
Yes.
I mean, surely a path should really be from one manufacturer to another manufacturer. Should all be more or less the same, really, shouldn't it?
Unless somebody else has tweaked a patent that they've applied for.
It could be. No, we haven't, Jeff. Both of us haven't, but I'd like to hear them. The thing is, go on, mate.
I'm just wondering what PRS Jeff is going to throw them into. I mean, he's got that telly there, hasn't he? I don't know what the rest of his collection contains to know whether or not a PAF's going to work, or who knows.
I would say, I mean, Les Paul pickups always tend to be a little bit darker sounding.
Yeah.
PRS pickups always tend to be a little bit darker sounding, so it'd be good to maybe it's worth doing.
Can you underwind them if they're coming from a company like DiMarzio? Can you go as far as tweaking them to the point of underwind, overwinds, and all the rest of it, or is it just that's what's in the box, take it or leave it?
I haven't got a clue.
I've never gone into the weeds with their offering, their product range.
No.
So sorry, Jeff. Neither Paul nor I can help you on that one, I'm afraid. Give it a whirl and come back to us. Tell us how you got on.
But double cream pickups.
Well, I mean, there's mileage in it. It's been done before, once or twice.
Keith says, "Evening, gents. Looks like James is hiding in a bush, stalking someone."
Now, look, what a man does with his weekend, as long as nobody gets yes, he's doing his level best. Bless him. It is one of James's finer traits, his unbridled enthusiasm. And to think that he could get through the motorway network of this great land of ours in time to do this show, God bless his cotton socks. There we are. But no, he's not doing anything illegal, Keith. Don't worry about that.
Top Load Tilly says, "Hello all." Hello, Top Load. Location recording.
We've missed Mike. Hello, Mike.
Oh, Mike. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Mike. Hello, mate. Sorry.
Yeah. And is that John Randall, the phenomenal powerhouse drummer from East Anglia, that's also saying hi, guys? Not sure. Let's hope he comes back to confirm or deny. And David, is that Brose?
David Brose.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you very much, David. Good on you, mate. Nice to see you. And I'm up to the same place as you with Top Load.
Okay, sorry. So Top Load's in. James is trying to chat in. We're going to ignore anything James says because he didn't turn up. Yeah,
I've turned the phone off now. He's not going to get anything else out of us.
Cowbell's in the house. Double D guitar. High working still, but sneaking in when I can. Good to know, mate. Just in case. Right. Evening, gents. JTK, good evening. Cheers from Finland.
Finland. Wowzers.
Oh, mate, they come from all over the place.
Now, look, I've got the tiniest of thumbnails there of JTK. I can't, but that's an intriguing collection of guitars. I'm assuming it's a he.
I can't. Let me see can we see that? Oh, there we go. I can click.
Yeah, you can do the thing. Right. So that looks like an Epi SG.
Yeah.
Is that a 12-string Fender next to it? It's a really long headstock, isn't it?
It looks like it's been stretched out there. I don't know what that is.
Intriguing.
Nice.
Beautiful. Hello, JTK. Hello, Scandinavia. Hello, Cleveland.
FL. Hello, gents. Missed a few of these. Glad you chaps are still doing these. Frank here from sunny Los Angeles. Oh, mate.
Hello, Frank.
It's freezing at the moment.
Jealous of that, mate. I'm going back to Wales, which is a land tacked onto the left-hand side of England tomorrow morning. And I've been there most of this week, and it's been -3. So if you're enjoying the sun out there, enjoy it for the pair of us, please, old boy. Thanks for being here, Frank.
Matthew Cornwell, hello, mate.
Hello, Matthew.
Farid's in the house.
Ooh, now you see, unlike James, I like a bound guitar.
James, what is he talking about, James? So just to let you guys know, if you haven't heard any James's craziness, James doesn't like bound Les Pauls, which is,
as he would say, he's entitled to opinion, wrong as it may be.
Absolutely. John Waller, afternoon.
Hi, John. Afternoon. Whereabouts are you in the world? Is that East Coast to be on the afternoon over there?
I forgot where John is, actually. It's John I think John's over in California way. Ship Shepherd, evening chaps. I wonder if Antelope have released a new interface this week.
It's been a few hours, hasn't it?
Yeah, they must have done. It's ridiculous, isn't it? Right. Atari Wolf. Hi, guys. Hope you are all well. A stupid question. Have been using a Floyd Rose system lately. Are you only meant to use the tuning pegs on the bridge? No. Do you know much about Floyd Rose?
Not a wild amount, but I tune at the headstock first, get it as near as possible with the fine tuners in the middle down the business end, and then lock up and go for my life.
It's exactly how to do it. So get the strings used to the tension. Give it a little wiggle about. Make sure they're all locked into place. Once it's sort of holding in, lock it all off at the top, and then wiggle away, as it were. Wang away.
I'm preempting here. Go on. David's got the knowledge for us.
Look at this. 87.
Good Lord. Gems. Does that make anybody else feel really old?
I remember I used to, and I had 2 pink ones.
Right.
I bought one.
How old were you at the time?
I don't know. It was probably around when he joined Whitesnake, around that sort of time. When was that?
What, an album? 92 for that?
Something like that.
I'm going to go 92, and I'm going to Google it while you're finding out.
What was the album called?
Slip of the Tongue.
It was Slip of the Tongue. And I bought one then and hated it and thought, I've got
1989.
89?
Wow. They did Donington that year, didn't they?
Yes, I went to that show, yeah.
Wowzers. Yeah.
Paul Taylor, Cumbria calling. Love the Q&A. Glad to have you along, mate.
Even more north than where I hail from.
Coffee with Sam says, I'm so glad you've ditched James. I prefer Greg.
Love you too, Sam. Thank you, mate.
This happened to me when I couldn't do one show because I was on holiday. Everyone was sort of saying it's better without Paul.
Yeah, well, change is as good as a break. For those of you interested, Sam does a podcast called Coffee with Sam, which is well worth a listen. Covers an awful lot of ground, not necessarily musical related, but he's a thoroughly interesting chap. Very charismatic. If you've got a bit of time on a commute or while you're doing other things about the house, look up Coffee with Sam. He's a good guy.
I like that. Do you know, Sam, is Sam one of your pals?
He is part of the cheerleading madness that we occasionally get.
It's Sam.
With.
That's Sam.
Sam.
Oh, sorry.
He's obviously watching along with James in the van on the way back from Manchestershire.
I didn't see. I couldn't see the picture. Hi Sam. Yeah, good.
Lazarus Epiphone.
Charlie Mail. I have Lazarus Epiphone. One of the first to test on YouTube. What are your thoughts? And what does limited edition mean? But when it comes to Joe Bonamassa, I'm not sure what limited edition means because
he's a money-making machine, isn't he? That guy.
He is a machine.
That sounds very cynical. I think he's a phenomenal player. I respect him as an artist. I'm also very respectful of his business acumen. So in terms of what does limited edition mean, perhaps the same as when JHS did a limited edition run of those Legends pedals. The first ones were limited edition, and then the next rounds will be some other pedals. Cynic that I am these days, the money has fallen out of the music industry. Diversify, make a few quid to pay the mortgage another way. If you enjoy the guitar, and I mean, crikey, it looks the part, doesn't it? Brilliant. And you've got a limited edition one. There's a decent chance you'll sell it for at least what you paid for it if you ever part with it.
Yeah. I think like Greg, I think Bonamassa is absolutely amazing. Amazing guitar player. But yes, definitely. I don't know, when a man sells flip-flops on his website.
Yeah.
Anyway, Mr. Aiton's got a question. He says, Mike Aiton says, I have a Pat Metheny Ibanez Archtop. I will never play like him remotely, but I love the tone and the feel. Absolutely.
If it's a tool that brings out musicality in you and music creativity, brilliant, wonderful. Out of interest, having said that, heartfelt and quite philosophical point, when you say love the tone and the feel, is it the tone of Metheny or the tone of you? I'd be interested to know. Is it something that's bringing your tone out, Mike, and making you feel happier about the sound that you're creating on the instrument? Or are you trying to get absolutely on the nose for the Metheny sound?
I've got a few. When Mason comes on, I've got a couple of questions for him about tone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll talk about that, about different guitars and stuff. Pet says, speaking of Nuno and Co, me and a few mates saw them do pornography in Fulham Brum years ago.
I went to the same tour with Baggy, the bass player that James used to play with for many, many moons at Forum in London. And it was, having listened to that album through the majority of my teen years, it was like a religious experience, being, breathing the same air as the guy and just watching him do it note for note with the most consummate of ease. And the hours of struggle to get anywhere near some of those riffs. I mean, I'm preempting Pet here. He's talking about He-Man Woman Hater. Still can't play it. 30 years later. But wow, what a guy.
It is. I mean, ever since I heard Nuno, I had to go and buy an ADA MP1. Do you remember the ADA MP1?
Of course. Yeah.
That was the Nuno tone machine. It had that sort of saturation on it. That sort of, the sound that you got out of it.
Yeah. I saw a Rabia video where he was talking about him having used the Soldano in some recordings as well, which I never knew about, because he did a signature amp, didn't he, a few years back?
Oh, was it Washburn? Who made it?
I'm not sure if it was Washburn.
Oh, it was ridiculous. So so I saw an interview with this. Who made it?
You carry on. I'll Google.
So this big, odd-looking amplifier, and apparently he didn't really like it. He didn't like it, and I think he had to use Randall. It was Randall.
Yeah,
and he had to have them on stage, but didn't use them.
Well, that tour that Pet and I are referencing there, he had them on stage, and I thought, wow, he's using it. But in hindsight, slightly less wet behind the ears. The light was on. Doesn't necessarily mean anybody was home.
Absolutely. Mike says, I may be the only one in the world who's never heard of Mr. Nuno. Oh, mate.
Oh, Mike.
Well, if you like, I mean, he's just one of the great.
He's a far cry from Pat Metheny, I'll tell you that, Mike.
He is.
He is a rock guitarist of the hair metal ilk in terms of chops. Subsequently, post
it wasn't really hair metal, was it?
I wouldn't. Well, I mean, if you look at the artwork on the back of Pornography, it definitely was. But I would agree that their hairdos were astonishing. But yeah, that was one of the things that he said they didn't really fit the hair metal genre. Didn't fit a number of things, which is kind of one of the reasons why he suggests they almost fell between a number of stools, as it were. Subsequently, had a bit of a stab at it as a solo artist. The last really big thing that I can think of that he did was being the live tour guitarist for a Rihanna tour. Yeah. I can't remember who the MD for that tour was, but took these arrangements to Nuno and said, this is right up your strata. And it sounded phenomenal, the stuff that I saw of it. It sounded really great. But again, you chuck him in the band, he's one of those musicians, isn't he, who's going to drag people along and improve everybody around him.
Yeah.
Started as a drummer, played too many notes, went onto the bass, played too many notes, became a lead guitarist. Can you ever have too many notes as a lead guitar? Yeah,
Absolutely not.
Look him up, Mike. Go for it.
Yeah. You definitely won't miss out there. John Randall, absolutely not a drummer. Good man.
It's a different John. Hello to the other John Randall that we do know, and hello to you, John, who is not a drummer.
Pet also says, naive question, is it possible to recreate the He-Man Woman Hater riff with a Telly Princeton and a Sweet Tea version 3? Do you know, I reckon. I mean, you're never going to get that amount of saturation out of it, but
No.
a Telly, I think is a good shout.
Yeah. Sweet tea, I don't know how dirty Sweet Tea gets.
It gets dirty. It's Sweet Tea was a dual. It was the.
Is that a JHS one?
Yeah. It's a JHS. I think it's a dual Angry Charlie.
Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah. You're going to get in the ballpark, I would have thought.
Yeah.
Are you in a position, Pet, to absolutely rinse the Princeton? Can you turn it all the way? Not to the point where it's farted out, maybe, because it was quite tight bottom end, wasn't it, on He-Man Woman Hater?
I think.
But yeah, you're going to have to give it some beans to get the moving air to get something of the feel, I would have thought.
I would have thought so. But yeah, a Telly definitely. I think the Telly's because his I mean he had humbuckers on that N4 that he was using, but
yeah, he's got a I don't know what they call it, but it's basically a Telly body with an N4 neck on it and a 6-way switch for the pickup selector at the minute.
Oh, I like this. Is that what he's playing at the moment?
Yeah, it seems to be on that quite a lot. He did an interesting cover of a Radiohead track with Julian Lennon not too long ago. If you can find that on Instagram. So yeah, he obviously has some love for the Telly. On the subject of can you get hard, like a really hard rock sound with a Telly, I was listening to a live Them Crooked Vultures recording on the way home, and Josh Homme pulled out a Telly for crikey, some chunky old. It might have been Caligula from that album that they did, but I wouldn't have expected him to have been a Telly guy for that album because it just sounds massive, doesn't it?
You can do anything with the Telly.
Well, yeah, exactly. We both said that the other week, didn't we? If you could only take one to a gig, what would it be?
Telly
every time.
Jim Glue, hello from Derby. Hello, mate.
Hey, Jim. Nice to see you, man.
Pet says -3 is quite warm. It's quite warm for Wales, lads. It is, isn't there?
Yeah.
James says, "Stop giving me a kick in." Should we stop? Should we stop giving him a kick in yet?
Yeah. I mean, it's never going to grow old, that is it? Can you eject him from the chat as well?
I can. I don't quite. How do I do this? I can do it if I wanted to. James, you've got to behave yourself. Frankie JL says, would love to come visit your country. England's one of my bucket list locations. Oh, good.
Get involved, Frankie. Get involved, mate. We'll go for a pint of British ale.
Yes, absolutely. Mike Ayton, I love bonding too, especially on tellies.
Yeah.
Bar binding, I think he means. Tellies. John Waller says, I visited Cardiff on Wales while in law school. I had a friend from undergrad from there in Seattle. Nice. Terry Wolf, thanks. Anytime, mate. Stephen James is from Brisbane. Good day. Good day, Stephen.
Good day, mate. Good day. How you going?
Hell of a voice on Coverdale. Golden throat tones. He still sounds quite good. Still Coverdale.
Yeah.
Right, he's got to be in his 70s.
Oh, well, yeah. First time I was aware of him linking the themes of this evening's show together was we may be human, but we're still animals. On Passion and Warfare, Steve Vai.
Oh, did he do that?
That was him doing the voiceover because they'd obviously post Whitesnake at that stage or post Vai being in Whitesnake. That was him. Also, on the subject of linking things together, we've mentioned Bonamassa. There is a wonderful interview between JB and Coverdale on YouTube, which you can find without too much bother, where they just talk music, and it's a really interesting and nice conversation. Two guys kind of exploring, getting to know each other live. Nice listen. Well worth looking for.
Nice. JTK says in small picture solo 1 point. Oh, I see. Okay, so he's saying what he's got. So it's a solar 1.6D, which is Solar, isn't that what's his name's company, isn't it? Who makes Solar?
You carry on, I'll look it up.
Oh, yeah. Epiphone Carina, nice. SG99, Fender American Elite Strat, Squire Strat, Tokai Custom Les Paulish type model, Fender Telly 3-tone Sunburst,
Nice.
84, and a Reverend Double Agent W. Nice.
Tidy work, mate. Well done.
And look at this. Look, all the Ivies are in.
Who have we got? Oh, we've got Jen. Oh, hello.
So Jen's in. Thing is, Jen doesn't come. Jen doesn't come on the show when James
is there. Yeah, she wants a break. But yeah, God bless you, Jen. I hope the kids are behaving in Daddy's absence.
Absolutely. Paul Taylor said, "I've got 2 heads, 1 cab. Ever used any amp switches live? I like dirty on one, clean on the other head. Don't want 2 cabs."
Yes, I'm thinking about putting a rig like this together. So no is the short answer from me, Paul. I'm very interested to know what experience Paul Drew has got, though.
I've got an amp switcher that I've blown up, or that has blown up on me.
Yeah.
Would I use? It's a big thing. I've never seen bands take amp switches live. I know why, because I think just the best thing to have. I think, look, the amount you're going to pay for an amp switcher, you might as well get another cab and an AB box.
Right.
Okay, if you don't want to, if I can't think of another way around it. I mean, so either get smaller cabs, get 2 smaller cabs,
right,
and AB it, and then an ABY. Sorry, so you can go A and you can go B. You can go both together. That's what I would do. I wouldn't bother with taking an amp switcher. Also, you'd have to get one that's MIDI, so because you don't want to go up to the amp and go, right, I've got a clean section, click, put it on that. Which there are, there are MIDI versions.
What are they called? No, it's gone. I was trying to think of the Dutch company that do amps. That's Paul David Hook. Yeah, they do one that's got MIDI in it, don't they? And at least one. And what's the Rev thing that both you and James had a go on? Has that not got MIDI on it, or is that just the IRs loaded in?
No, that's not MIDI. No, Rev. I think some of the bigger Revs have MIDI.
Okay.
And what other amps have MIDI? Some. There's a few different amps that have MIDI, but you don't really need the amp to be MIDI. You need the amp switcher to be MIDI, so you can switch on a pedal. I'd much rather get an AB. I mean, it'd be much cheaper to get an ABY box, and then it'd be so much better.
Yeah,
and 2 cabs. If you're taking 2 heads around, you might as well take 2 cabs.
Yeah, your back's already done for. I got a friend who plays with a Tweed and a black panel. Both point-to-point, hand-wired, custom builds, and he ABYs it.
Does he?
Awesome things. Yeah, 2 phenomenal sounding. Either amp would do perfectly well for most gigs on their own, but with both of those moving a bit of air, lovely thing to behold. Nice.
So I'm looking. I'm on the amp hunt again.
Yes, I want to talk to you about this.
Yeah. We'll talk about this in a minute. Keep on playing. It says hi, hello mate. Good to have you on board.
Keep on playing.
Surf B is in from Boston. That's a nice.
How you going?
Oh, it's what's his name? Jeff Brock. 36th anniversary are modelled on the pickups in Larry DiMarzio's original 59 Les Paul. Just check DiMarzio's been around since 75. I put them in a black Les Paul paint double cream. Nice. Oh, that's quite exciting, I think.
Yeah.
The only thing that I'd like to know is did Larry DiMarzio take his extortionately expensive pickups out of that 59 Les Paul and unwind them? How do they do that? Do they? I wouldn't want to go anywhere near that.
Yeah. I mentioned it a couple of weeks ago, so apologies for repeating myself, but the guy's name escapes me. The chap who runs Bare Knuckle Pickups.
Oh, yeah. I can't think
I'm
of his
sure,
name.
Yeah. Feel free to internet him, dear viewer. He talked about getting hold of Jimmy Page's number 1 for a period, and looked at, could I take these out? Should I take them out? But thought better of it, thinking those screws might be held together by decades of sweat.
And everything.
If I get one of them out and it goes pop, what am I going to say to Mr. Page?
Absolutely.
Or the people, the henchmen that he sends round to me afterwards?
Yeah, absolutely. So Justin says, ever heard of the YouTube channel KDH? He bought Bonamassa merch for a laugh. It was pretty funny. And it's woeful though. I have heard of KDH actually.
I haven't, no.
Yes. He bought Bonamassa merch. I think I know he's got to do it. I know Bonamassa's got to do it because it's, the music industry is, you don't make the money out of it that you used to, but he's not, he's not a poor man. He's got a few different properties and he's got hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of guitars. That's
his retirement right there, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
I saw years and years ago, I saw Albert Lee do a masterclass in Cambridgeshire, and there were quite a lot of questions about an old guitar that Clapton gave him, and he just consistently, after it first came up, referred to it as "that's my pension."
Oh, really?
He's been playing. And you think about Albert Lee's CV, the people he's played with, the recordings he's been on, and even someone in his position. A guitar is my pension. Because old guitars, Paul, can go for quite a lot of money, can't they? Is this the perfect time to drop a link?
Should we do it? Should we do it now?
Yeah.
Okay, let's do it. I can do this.
I've been spending time on an electronic bidding service this week, dear viewer. It's my daughter's birthday at the weekend, and we'll come to that a bit later on as well. But in the course of searching for a few toys, I found this, if you're able to make this work. Now, who was it that was calling us from Cumbria earlier? Why don't you just nip across to Sunderland and get a 1959?
Oh!
I mean, crikey, look at it.
But look at that.
The way
that's got to be refin. Look at that. Look at the shine on that.
It is, mate. I'm not sure it is. He said it's gorgeous, isn't it? Look at those creams in there as well. He was asking about creams earlier.
Yeah.
That just looks stunning, doesn't it? And on the headstock, you can see the way it's just starting to crack here and there and there. It looks beautiful, doesn't it?
It's smiling at you. It's smiling at you. It wants you to.
Wowzers. And he said that he's going to include the original tuners, but they've started to caramelize. So he's replaced the tuners on it, but they're in the box and they come with it. And he's the wonderful tagline on the description was definitely selling because I'm definitely retiring this time or something. Where is it?
So it says So the guitar is not at my retail premises; it's in my vault. Examination by genuine buyers will be available. Reason for sale: definitely retiring. So James and I next week are going to visit going to visit someone, and we are going to try out a 59 and a 57. Les Paul. So I'm extremely excited about that because I've never tried an all burst, and I'm super excited about that.
See how you get on with them, because in terms of the way that guitar now looks, if the person you're going to meet is game, and you'd understand if they weren't, see if they would undo the pickup selector such that you can move the treble bass out the way and see what the original color of the paintwork was underneath that.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Nice.
Yeah,
nice.
Yeah, that many years worth of drying.
I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah,
I'm going to take my 57. I'm going to take my 57 custom shop with me.
Okay, do an AB.
Yeah, it'd be interesting.
That'd be an interesting video, won't it?
Yeah. So Surfer B says we all have questions about tone, especially tone hair.
Or should it be hair tone? Yeah. Well, neither Paul nor I are in a position to discuss that one.
Oh, no, this is a choice, mate. I'm not actually bored.
Yeah.
It's a choice.
Yeah.
KDH and not Bonamassa.
Yeah, I figured that, Justin.
Yeah. Great to see Greg back, says Duncan.
Bless you, Duncan. Nice to have you in with us, mate.
Mike Ayton says, Ree Matheny, no, I don't do the chorus thing on stereo or the super rolled off tone thing. It's just a nice open sounding arch top. Nice.
Yeah, nice. Fair play, mate.
D Mac, haven't seen the Lazarus yet, but the Epi 59 Les Pauls are quite good. A little pricey though. can get nicer lower end Gibsons for about the same price, sometimes lower. 28 Gibson Les Paul faded. Faded are great. Yeah, they are. Yeah, absolutely.
It's intriguing, isn't it, with the whole why are you buying a guitar? And again, you know, as when we get to it, and some of the things that I've been looking at this week, are you buying that Lazarus because you think, well, that's the right wood combination, the right pickup combination, that's going to make me fly? Or are you buying it thinking, I'll have a play with this, and I know that the market that Bonamassa is creating means that I'm going to get at least the same money back for it when I ship it on in months and years' time? It's up to you, isn't it? To each their own.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt Everett says, hello from Dallas, Texas. The great content is so much appreciated. Thank you. Anytime, mate.
Thank you, Matt. I wondered when I saw that name if that was Matt Everett from BBC Six Music fame. And what was his band? I can't remember. Wardrobe or something.
Good. That's a good band. Jeff Rock, is there a great there is a great YouTube video of Nuno and a bunch of players doing an instrumental bow rap during lockdown.
Yes, that was all the guitar gods in the world, wasn't it? Vi was involved. Was Ingy Malmsteen on there too?
Oh, Malmo.
Yeah. I mean, it's an absolute note fest. Well worth a look. You're right, Jeff.
And I'm loving Martin's picture.
What was everyone's first? Mine was a Columbus Strat 69.
So yeah, Martin said, "What's everyone's first?" His was a Columbus Strat 1969 Wreck-It to Rory's. Nice,
fair play. What was yours, Paul?
And mine was a Squire Strat.
Yeah, I had an Encore S-type or S-shape thing, which I too, Martin, have taken literally all of the finish off. It was a pretend red. It wasn't quite a Fender red, but I took all of the finish off back to the thoroughly questionable timbers that it had been hacked together with. But yeah, I couldn't part with that guitar.
You still got it?
Yeah, still got it. Yeah, wow. I'm a sentimental soul, Paul.
Wow. Jess was a Columbus Les Paul. Still got it. Nice.
Sweet.
Scooby Stapp says John Five plays tellies with Rob Zombie. That's some rocking riff.
Yeah, fair shout, Scooby.
Yeah. John Five's a big telly collector.
Is he?
Yeah. Yeah, great player and all that, and big telly collector. Likes them really clean, apparently. They have to be like sort of mint. Jim Glue, ha ha ha.
That's probably us taking the Michael out of James trying to get involved in his own show.
Peter Ludlow, the new pickups that James bought sounded brilliant for the money. What was the build quality like? Yeah, really good, actually. Yeah, they're really good. Yeah, definitely.
It does kind of shed light on magic, doesn't it? The likes of Damasio, Seymour Duncan. I'm just thinking of the first pickup companies that spring to mind. I'm sure they can all justify the reasons why it costs so much money, but when you can get something that makes the amount of difference that thing did for change from £100 for a set,
for the pair,
it's certainly worth looking into. Don't just go direct for the big names. Do some research and see how much bang for your buck you can achieve. Yeah.
Paul St. Mark's, Ola England. Yes, that's right. Who I was thinking with for Solar guitars. Okay. Solar, Ola. Brian Lee Cooper says, "Love what you guys are doing." Question: have you ever tried a rocking? I think it's rock and roll. It's rock and roll relic guitars. I haven't tried one actually. Look great though. Look really good. I think I've got a feeling that Renegade Guitars is a dealer for rock for rock and roll relics.
Yeah, that does look nice. Oh wow!
Have you got some on the screen?
Yeah, but I don't know how to share a link with you guys.
You go share at the bottom of your page.
Of course,
share. You share, and then you can click on the thing you're sharing.
Share screen. Oh dear God, sharing. It's giving me tips, dear viewer. I don't know where are we? Windows. Chrome tab. Here we go. Right. Can you see that?
I can see that. Here we go.
I mean, that looks delightful.
Oh,
like 2K. That. Free shipping, though. And then Ormskirk, for the international viewer, is near Liverpool, home of a band called the Beatles. I can't remember what they were called. Anyway, the northwest of England. 2K. I mean, that looks the part, doesn't it? What are we getting there, then?
Show me the headstock. Show me the headstock.
Rosewood.
Click on the headstock.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah, but let's be. How do I stop sharing? There we go. Let's be realistic. You are picky about headstock.
Yeah,
as most are.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No.
They look nice, Brian.
Really
in
nice,
short answer.
Really nice. Jeff Rock, can you split those Marshall 2x12s stereo cab to run 2 separate amps? Yes, you can.
Yep.
You sure can. I used to do that. 1922s are the ones you can do that with. Yes, the old JCM 900 cabs. Really good.
Have a look, Jeff, at, again, the joys of YouTube. It's not that hard to build a cab if you're useful with your hands, and just wire it how you like. And then you can have something that is absolutely bespoke, A, to the sound you want, and B, to the weight that your spine can contend with, given that you're going to be up and down the stairs to the gig at least a few times if you're carrying 2 heads around.
Paul St. Mark's. Paul is in Torquay. He's checking in. Nice. Good to have you along, mate. Olad im Eji Adelija. I'm sure I pronounced that completely wrong. Hello, mate. Good to have you along.
Hello, Olad Imeji.
John Waller, for FYI, Rev G20 and D20 do have MIDI.
Okay. For the switching thing we were talking about earlier.
I don't remember a MIDI on the back of my D20, but interesting. Yeah, it must be for the switching, yeah. Matthew Cornwall says, Paul, have you seen some of your recent... he says, Paul, I've seen in some of your recent videos you've been using the Boss TAE and have seen you using the 2-note studio rack. If you could only keep one, which would it be and why? That's a really good question. The Boss TAE I would keep. Because the 2-note studio doesn't attenuate. So you can plug into it, and then if you plug your cab into it, it's the same volume as what you're driving your amp. So great for like if you've got like, well, it's good for 2 things. If you've got a separate room where your cab goes in, if you're in a studio and you've got a separate room where your cab goes in, soundproof room, it's great for that sort of thing. So you can mic up the cab and also the 2 notes, and get the best sounds out of that. Or for live, or for instance, or don't plug a cab into it and just run that as your load box.
Right.
And it works really well and it sounds brilliant. It sounds fantastic. But the 2 notes, the tube amp expander has effects, and the effects go to the cab. You can have the effect going to the cab as well as through the line outs. And the attenuator is really good. It's like unlike the Universal Audio Aux, which is stepped gains, it goes click and it's sort of quiet, and it's like loud, and it's really loud, and then it's loud. It's not like that. It's like it's a really good pot on it, so you can get it any level you want, and it sounds brilliant. But you have to work at it. You have to get the right cabs. Sometimes it can sound a little bit bright, so I'm really happy with the cab that I've got in the tube amp expander at the moment, the way I've set it up. But I don't think I'd ever change it. I don't think I'd go through the different settings. I think I'd just leave it as it is. That's what it is. That's the sound. Done.
Fair play. I don't know. I can look this up myself, but ballpark, how much is a tube amp expander?
They're about £1,000. You can pick them up for less than £1,000, I think, now.
It does a lot of things, though, doesn't it?
Yeah. It does everything you need it to do, and it's also got a power amp in it. So if you've got like an amp that's a 20-watt amp, for instance, 5-watt amp, and you really like the sound of it, take that out live, and then you've got, then you can also expand it by adding the power amp on the tube amp expander, and it sounds good. It sounds really good.
Cool.
Keith says, as I understood it, double cream is a trademark, not a patent, but only in the US. Interesting. Tim Mills, bare knuckle, exactly. Well
Thank
done.
you, John. Well done.
Thank God. Frankie J. Love amps, but expensive for my limited wallet. I own a Helix floor and love it. Nice one, yeah. GL Astat Classic S, SD BG 1400 Ridge pickup, and a Valentine swap pickups for Thornbuckers and Thornbucker Plus. Nice. Thornbuckers sound good.
Yeah, I've been looking more and more ASAT type instruments of late. I quite like the idea of getting hold of one and then putting that Duesenberg bender bridge on it.
Yeah.
With a couple of the benders. I think that would be an easier mod to do than build in a B bender and have to do a whole heap of routing.
Yeah.
But yeah, the ASATs just look really pretty, don't they?
Oh yes. Paul St. Mark's at 59 sick. Shame about the Bigsby. I quite like the Bigsby.
And yeah, personally, I'd be happier for my £300,000 without the Bigsby, but
yeah,
to each their own.
Keep on playing. There's so much information about gear today; it's killing me. I just want to play and settle with the gear I have, get the most out of it, and that's it. Maybe I'm too old school. What do you think? Completely agree.
Yeah, I presume Keep On Playing that you are aware of 5 Watt World. That's a channel that would probably speak to what you're saying there. And I agree. The amount of things that I watch, these guys, Paul and James, and a selection of other music-based channels on YouTube, I just keep thinking back to, I could probably do something similar to that with that. And I've never tried that before. And it's stuff that I already own. Do you need the latest new shiny gimmick, or are you actually in the ballpark? Could you get in the ballpark with what you've already got and just spend more time playing instead of driving to and from shops?
Absolutely. I think it's unfortunately that's part of what this channel is, because James and I are both quite obsessed about gear and stuff. We find it really interesting and how different things sound. But
it's definitely interesting.
Yeah, I love it. I just love gear. But yeah, absolutely. If I wasn't doing the channel.
Yeah. I guess with you guys as well, it's new things give you a greater palette to service your clients in the studio. That's your profession. I wonder if Keep On Playing is, a weekend warrior, James's phrase, and is thinking, actually, what I really want to do is do some playing, because for 5 days a week, I'm sat in front of a computer doing something that's a long way from my heart, as opposed to that great feeling that picking up a guitar and playing makes.
It is funny though, isn't it? It is funny. I mean, I get it as well. I'll have a piece of gear, or it's especially before I started doing this.
Yeah,
a bit of gear, and then you'd be playing, especially the new amp modelers. Let's say an amp modeler. So you buy a Helix, for instance,
right? Yeah.
And then you're playing that, and you think, oh, this is, great, or Kemper, whatever. And you're going, this is great. I'm really enjoying this. And then something else comes out, and you go, ooh. Is that going to be better than what I've got? And it gnaws away at you.
Yeah. Think, how many hours did you spend with the Quad Cortex that in hindsight you just think, could have done something else at that time? But hey, live and learn, don't you? See, always 2020 with hindsight. Huh?
Yeah. I will speak to Mason about this later on, actually. But guitars as well. I just think if I just had one telly or 2 tellies, I'd be happy.
Yeah,
I don't need that bunch of guitars behind me.
Cover a lot of ground.
We talk about Charlie Mail. Thanks for AM.
And then the next one.
Thanks
there we go.
I see.
Trigger happy Charlie on the space bar.
Not a problem, mate. Charlie Mail. My first guitar was a Shadow HH. Do you remember or know them? I don't know that actually. Seems that a lot of people keep their first guitars.
88.
Paul's was an Encore S-Type 2. I'm guessing bought from Argos.
Brother.
Bought from Argos?
Mine was bought from the music shop in the little town that I grew up in, that I subsequently had a Saturday job at, and subsequently did work experience at, and subsequently got my first summer job at. And then, as I said when I last appeared on the show a few weeks back, became owned by somebody else and employed another guy that I went to school with that sold me the telly that I play first choice these days as well.
Nice.
So yeah, long old story there.
Nice one. Lucas Fowler, hey guys, love the channel. Thanks, mate. Good to have you on board.
Fine tuning guitars. Is that Lucas's company, or does he just really like them, I wonder?
We'll have a look.
Come back to us, Lucas. Tell us more about that, mate.
Keith Milner says, Jeff Rock depends on the impedance. Paul, can you tell us about Ohms? Oh, my God.
Keith, you cheeky scamp.
Definitely not. I tell you what, though, Mason, if anyone wants to know about ohms, I'm sure Mason will.
Yeah,
yawn.
if there's one person who's going to appear on the show tonight that can tell us it's not you or I.
Absolutely. Dave Rose says, who's the most musically talented of the Beatles' children? Oh, Julian, surely.
I mean, Zach Starkey's pretty decent, isn't he?
Yeah, that's true. That is true. That is true.
who
I'm
else?
going to go with Julian.
Danny Harrison's all right. I mean, he can hold a tune, can't he? He plays with some decent pals. Not that much.
Mike Aiton says, Paul, have you decided on the 2 rock or the matches?
Yes. No, come on. I really must push you on this now, Paul. Are you going to be able to tell us, or do we have to wait for the next video installment?
No. The 2 rock is still here, although the deposit has been paid and it's sold.
Oh, right. It's going. Interesting.
2 rock's going. So I need to go and deliver that, actually. I need to go and take it down. I think he's back this weekend or back tomorrow.
And is that to an extent based on the fact that you've got other things that get close to what the 2 rock can achieve, where the match does something different?
The matches definitely does things different. I just think if I had to keep one, and trust me, I've been over the last. I sold it on. I think he called me on Monday and said that they'll take it, and I've been going. Oh, have I made a mistake? Have I made a mistake?
Yeah.
It's so good. It's so good. It's so good. And then the 2 rock's just more what I would do. The matches is more what I would, what I use.
Yeah.
But 2 rock, it's just such a great thing. I know I'm going to regret it, and I know at some point I'll go. One will pop up if I can possibly afford it. I'll grab one. I'm possibly thinking that I don't need the 100 watts.
Right.
So I might get a studio. I think Mason's actually got a studio.
Okay.
Which is a 35 watt version. Possibly.
It's interesting, isn't it? What do you want it to do? I know that I harped on about Joey Landreth when I was on last time, but I'm going to mention him again tonight. He's got that Bloomfield and has been told by a number of people that he plays it very quietly live.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but he has the 100 watt version and plays it in 100 watt mode just so he can have that headroom.
Wow.
But there's a number of different people have said to him on interviews that I've seen, you could really do with, pumping up. We've come to see you kind of thing. But yeah, doesn't blast it. So I wonder if you'd get the same. If you were going to get a 20 watt 2 rock, what's it going to do for you? Are you going to need headroom or?
Yeah, but I don't. I'm not so much into the whole headroom thing. I like compression. I like it to break up. I mean, Joe Landreth is absolutely amazing guitar player. Yeah,
useful. Just before we move on from that point, just to kind of close out Mark's thing, you have made your choice then, and you mentioned I'm going to think about it at some point. I think, have I made a mistake? What is the one piece of gear? And I will ask Mason this later as well. What's the one piece of gear that you had that you no longer own that you think error?
A 62 SG. Was it a 64? It might have been a 64.
Right. And how long ago did you have that?
Oh, when I was 18, 19.
Right.
Yeah, I worked in a music shop, and it came in, and it was in bits. As in it was just the body and the neck.
Right.
Obviously just attached. And so it came in, and it was just going for nothing. I think I bought it for like 200 quid.
Oh, God.
And
I'm not going to do it to you, but yeah, you just Google how much a 60 SG goes for now.
And so I got the luthier that worked in the shop to put pickups in it and some tuning pegs, and it sounded absolutely fantastic. But it was an SG, and at the time I was like, I was buying stupid things like gems. Yeah. What an idiot! See, that's why this has come around again, where these pointy headstock guitars come around again, and it's just making me go, I'm not buying a pointy headstock guitar. I wouldn't do it.
Don't do it. Yeah, these days, if I were to get anything pointy, I think a PRS would be as pointy as it got. Yeah,
absolutely. What about yourself? What have you? What would you regret?
It was more something that I didn't push the button on. Specifically, a 60s Vox AC30.
Oh, nice.
why? But I've always been tight, so I think, yeah, I'm not going to part with that much cash. But again, in hindsight, buying vintage gear that's decent, you're not going to lose on it, are you?
No.
I mean, even a player grade SG like the one you just talked about, it's still going to be worth a few shekels, isn't it?
Oh yes. John Wallace says Keith lol may wait for the aims for Mason. Talking about
absolutely
Mason,
right, John.
talking about Mr. Marangella.
There he is.
Hello, mate.
Hi there.
How you doing?
Can you hear me all right?
Yes. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Great.
Awesome stuff. So this is what's happened, Mason. I don't know if you've watched it from the beginning, but James was supposed to be here, and he was so intimidated by your presence.
he ran to the other end of the country.
No, so he was supposed to go to. So he phoned me up earlier today and said he's got to drive up to Manchester. Now, if you know the geography of England, where James lives, which is sort of Essex to Manchester, is probably about 4 hours. And I'm thinking, you're not going to get up to Manchester and back in time. So anyway.
And we realise how ridiculous this sounds to a man who lives in a land as vast as yours. But
no, I understand. I understand. And we want him to stay safe on the road. So coming in on the car wouldn't be advisable.
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Bless you, Mason. Bless you.
Absolutely. So we're taking questions for Mason. If anyone has any questions about Vertex or any sort of rig doctory, pedal boards, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, bring us your pedal board dilemmas or troubleshooting problems or any of that stuff. It's always good to work it out in a community of people.
But first of all, can we talk about? I'm gonna share something. Let me share screen because I want to talk about something. Window. I want to talk about this.
Yes, indeed. Very excited about this.
I didn't even know until someone mentioned it in the show last week that you're doing an amplifier.
Yeah.
So how long has this been on the cards, and what's the story behind this?
Yeah. So there's the story is not probably that that sexy or anything like that. It was just sort of that. A lot of our videos and things like that we do, it necessitates a clean amplifier. And I have a lot of different styles of amplifier here, from Soldanos to vintage Marshalls and stuff like that. But for the purposes of demonstrating pedals, the clean amps are sort of maybe the most neutral canvas to really showcase what pedals can do and what they're capable of. And so we ordinarily pick amps like Hot Rod DeVilles or Deluxes because they're available enough and everybody kind of understands that baseline to a degree. And so what I wanted to do is take an amp that I really like, which is the Dumble Steel String Singer, and make something that was a little more compact, travelable, and make it a little bit more pedal friendly. I think a lot of us, who are familiar with these amps or replicas of these amps know that they're, wonderful, clean platform, but the original Steel String Singer was, at minimum 100 watts. It was had a very immediate attack. And so there were some things about it that are wonderful and great. And there's some things about it that I think are maybe not as universal given the spectrum of pedals that are available now that just weren't available when the original amp was conceived. And so we did some things to kind of make it a little softer in the front end with pedals and really be able to take anything as low gain as a blues breaker or a tube screamer, and as high gain as a Shred Master or a Sir Riot or something like that. And it doesn't sound as though it's giving itself away as a pedal so much when it's run into this amp. And so I kind of try to make something that I'd like that's based on that Dumble typology, and it's all hand wired, as you can see.
Yeah, beautiful.
And we're kind of trying to be as transparent and democratic about what's inside there. We're showing sort of everything. There's no goop. There's no obstruction of any of the components or anything like that. And it's really a fantastic amp that just is great for pedals. And we're only making, I think the total number is 4 per month is sort of the max capacity. And so there's not a lot of them going to be made, and we're just going to kind of experiment and see how it goes. And if people respond to it, great. And if it's, this ill-conceived idea where it goes out there and people are like, this amp sucks, or it's too expensive, or whatever the possibility that may lie out there. We're kind of just taking it one amp at a time and hoping that people respond to it as well as I do. It's sort of the best that I can do in a clean amp pedal platform that sort of resembles that Dumble typology.
So is it going to be is it going to be like a 2-rock sort of on the clean, so it's going to be basically clean, or is it
yeah, it's single channel, no overdrive. It has a gain and a master control, but you can't really get a lot of gain out of it. You can get maybe some slight breakup, but it's nothing like an overdrive special or anything like that. So we're thinking kind of more of the sort of John Mayer, Stevie Ray Vaughan type of amplifier, and not the Robin Ford, Larry Carlton, Carlos Santana kind of incarnation of a Dumble. It's not the overdrive sound. It's really designed to be clean, takes pedals, has reverb on board, which most of the overdrive Dumbles didn't have, in it, with a few exceptions. So it's really just designed to be that.
Great. What was the thought process and the testing and such like, Mason, with regard to landing on that Celestian speaker in the end? I'm guessing you went through a number of iterations.
Well, I can't I can't really lie on this one. I mean, this is kind of an established speaker with the Dumble circuits. The G1265 has pretty much been the standard as far as what Dumble speakers would have if it was a 212 100-watt, or it would have an EV if it was a single 12 combo. But because this is only 50 watts, essentially a half-powered version of what a steel string singer might be, the 65-watt Celestian worked great, and that was, again, a pretty well established pairing with that particular style of amplifier. And so we tried to not deviate too much from it. And I think as you saw in the pictures, we tried to do a lot of the things the same way, where we use the same type of handle that would be on a Dumble steel string singer, where it kind of resembles the vintage Fender, except it has 2 screw holes on each side of the handle instead of one. And I don't know if I gave you a really clear image. Probably not so much of the top, but
no, not of the top. No, I think you sent me 4.
Yeah,
we got that one. So the other one was that one was.
Oh yeah, I was just showing a little of the hand wiring work, and it takes about 20 to 22 hours to make one. It's just two guys that are making, and one guy that's doing the cabinets and doing all the covering, and then another guy that's doing all the hand wiring. And we've been working on for probably 6 months in just kind of going back and forth with different incarnations and testing out different values. And I would say nothing in the amp is like, this is all sort of publicized circuits at this point. Anybody who has the ability and the will to make a steel string singer, most of that information is available to the normal consumer to be able to find that. But I think that it's with amps, whether it's 2-Rock or Amplified Nation, or a lot of great companies that build amplifiers, it's sort of like if you order a ribeye from 10 different chefs, they're all going to sort of have their perspective about how they might prepare it, whether that's a sous vide or they're going to do a pan fry or whatever it is. You're kind of getting my interpretation of how I feel like it maybe best is suited for the application of pedals. And if you go to 2-Rock, you're going to get their perspective, and you go to Fuchs, you're going to get his perspective on what it is. So it's all kind of standardized stuff that's in there. There's nothing that anybody can look at and be like, oh my god, I've never thought of that, or I've never seen that. There's nothing like that. It's just very optimized for the application. And I can say in that regard, being somebody that makes pedals, I feel like in some ways is advantageous in that I know what to look for as far as what pedals would work well with an amplifier, and what that amplifier kind of needs to be in order to make it work well as a sort of a synergistic relationship. Because so often we have a pedal or we have an amplifier in one context and it's great, and then we put 5 other pedals with it, or we move it to this other dissimilar environment, and the thing that we loved about it just disappears. And so having some experience with being able to sort of replicate the X factor of what makes pedals work really well with amps, I think has been sort of a helpful background that informed what the direction was with the amp.
Go on, Greg. Are you going to say something? Go on.
Yeah, I'm just interested to hear how happy you are with the way that your own pedals sound through it. It's hand and glove, I'm sure.
Yeah, they sound good, you know, and you know, I spent probably the least amount of time with my own pedals and
Really?
more with just like, you know, the kind of the standard
Right.
sort of baseline circuits like
Mhm.
Marshall Governor, which you guys have some experience with here,
Mhm.
Yeah.
Marshall Blues Breaker, Tube
Mhm.
Screamer,
Mhm. Yeah, the
using
main
sort of
food
different.
groups.
Yeah, just trying to, you know, in overdrives and distortions, when we talk about
Mhm.
pedal friendly amps, if the viewership, I'm sure that they know this
Mhm.
already, but usually people are talking about distinctly overdrive and distortion pedals.
Mhm.
Usually there's not a real problem with delay pairings and amplifiers,
Mm.
especially when you're talking about clean amps.
Sure.
So why is that? What is the? Because I'm sort of, and I'm doing a series on. I don't know if you've seen any of it, but I'm doing a series on sort of high end amplifiers, trying to find like my ideal amplifier. And it is true, like you can pick up, you can take one, you know, overdrive pedal, and it sounds great in something, and then you stick it in another amp, and it doesn't. So
Mhm.
so what is the reason for that? Is it headroom? Is it what is it?
I think it can be a kind of a confluence of things that could be the issue. I think sometimes the EQ of your amp may be complementary to one style of pedal over another. Well, you know, so like for example, I found that, you know, tube screamers with really mid-range emphasized amps typically aren't that great.
Yeah.
So for
Mhm.
example, a Tweed era Fender from the 50s already has a lot of mid-range. And then
Sure.
you take a tube screamer and you put it into that generation of Fender, it's very displeasing because you're sort of
Mhm.
doubling down on a particular frequency, and it can sometimes sound almost muddy and almost like a wah in a fixed position. Sometimes if you sort of use
Okay.
all that mid-range, it can kind of sound very unusual, and maybe, you know, unless you're going for that particular sound, but it doesn't sound like something that maybe we could anchor to like a specific, you know, iconic sound of a Tweed Deluxe, you know, like a
Mhm.
Steely Dan sound or something
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that.
Sure.
So I think that that's a lot of the thing that we hear. And then some amps do really well and excel with pedals that have, you know, in a kind of an asymmetrical sort of clipping versus a symmetrical sort of clipping. And also it's the taste of the player, you know, like a lot of guys who are into the Dumble thing tend to like that smoother, symmetrical
Mhm.
overdrive sound, and they don't like the more aggressive sort of like more like 2K plus
Right.
sort of emphasized overdrive pedals like a Distortion Plus or a Sir Riot, or, you
Mhm.
know, depending on how you dial it, a Marshall Governor or Shredmaster or Gainmaster. Any of those may not be so pleasing to what their ears are attuned to and the sound that they look for. So um, you know, but I mean, for the budget, you can get, you know, I think Hot Rod DeVilles are pretty impervious, and there's different versions. We did a video on
Yeah.
the Michael
Mm.
Landau amp last week, which is a really great sort of chameleon pedal platform that works really well with a lot of different pedals. And also one that I didn't talk about that's similar to it was the George Benson amp, which is a 112
Yeah.
version that had a lot of the
Mm.
same features of the Michael Landau one.
Right.
Didn't they do a George Benson twin as well?
I think that they did. I think that they did do a George Benson twin. And I mean, you know, nobody's cleaner than George Benson.
He's a
So
man.
yeah,
Yeah.
He's a
you're
man.
not going to find a gain pedal on his rig.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So what we're going to do in the chat, Mason, if you click on, I mean, you don't need to. Don't worry. I'll
Oh,
bring
yeah,
up.
I see over here on the right.
Oh,
Okay, in
okay, you've got
comments,
that.
I got it.
Okay,
Okay, I
so
see.
I'm going to miss out any of the ones that aren't related to questions for Mason. I'm going to miss out. But let's
Just
go
in
to
case,
yes, comment.
857. I think he's the one. Yeah, there we go.
There we go.
Info there. That'll do us. Let's get into
Okay.
it.
Just in case there's for Mason, Mobius,
Yeah.
Timeline, and Big Sky, or Boss Boss M500 series.
Nail your
Yeah.
colours to the mast, sir.
Yeah. Well, you know, again, this is just one opinion. I think that it's not necessarily you know, an ingrained you know, set in stone sort of opinion, but I kind of find that it depends on what your reference point is. I know that a lot of people talk about sort of the big three Strymon pedals is kind of being the gold standard when it comes to modeling, and the irony, I think, of some of them is a lot of the models, in particular in the modulation department, are emulating classic Boss effects, whether that's the vibrato or the CE1 or the CE2 or the what are some of the other ones that it's doing? think that some of the phaser options can also, they have like a phase 91, and then they have one that's more like the PH series. So the irony in some of those models is that they're Boss, they're emulating Boss stuff, and presumably Boss would know how to best do a CE1 or a CE2 or a Boss tremolo or a panning tremolo. So I think in the modulation department, I prefer the MD500 or the smaller series MD200 to the Mobius. But there's some things about the Mobius that I think are also really cool. I think that the user interface in the Mobius maybe is a little simpler. And I'm sure, as a lot of your viewers know, the Strymon guys were all ex Line 6 employees, and they had kind of come over and started their own brand. And I think that they really knew a lot about how to sort of edit themselves as far as like the user interface to really create simplicity and make it easy for the end users to use. And certainly it's been a formula for success for them. But I think in terms of the sounds, MD500 to me is preferable to the Mobius. I also think that the DD500, if you're interested in like vintage delays, like rack delays in particular, Roland was kind of the pioneer of a lot of those early rack delays, and a lot of the studio guys were all using the early Roland stuff. I really like the DD500 in the vintage delay setting. That's a very cool studio tone. But I think guys that like, some different tape delays and some of the stuff that in the Memory Man sounds, I think the Timeline maybe edges it out a little bit on that. But the one that I pick for my rigs is the DD500. And then I love the RV500. I think it's great, but I think the Big Sky is probably a little bit more ubiquitous and has maybe more usable tones for most people. And the other cool thing that it has is that cab sim option. So, predating what the Iridium did, you could use a Big Sky as an amp sim to go into the front of house with if you didn't have an amplifier or something like that. And I thought that was a cool feature at the time.
Yeah. Done that a few times. Yeah.
Wow.
I learned the hard way. I learned the hard way where I recorded something, through an amp mic, but I had it in the cab sim setting, and I wondered why it sounded so unusual.
That's a wonderful point about the Boss being sort of the DNA of effects, in the same way that Fender, Gibson are strewn through electric guitar history.
Yeah, absolutely.
Once we get into the effects department, Boss is the behemoth, isn't it?
Yeah. We've got some questions as well, but we'll go through some of the viewers' questions. So Mike Aiton says Mason. I think Nelson. I think that was spelled wrong. Clean boost. What's it all about?
Well, if it's a good one, I guess it doesn't really do anything. Like the beauty is in what it doesn't do. It doesn't color the sound. It doesn't change any of the EQs. Doesn't add any compression or anything like that. And it's just taking whatever you have and it's making it louder. And I think of the best clean boost out there is kind of being equivalent to a master volume on your amp, where you could it would have the same effect as though you walked over to your amp and you turned it up, a few notches just to add a little bit more output. And I think about that as sort of like opposed to something that's designed to actually impart color, and that's by design. So like something like the EP booster, for example, from Exotic, which I think is a pretty ubiquitous pedal that most of us know, that's really designed to impart the color of an Echoplex preamp into the sound. And there's plenty of other brands also that do it. And that's really designed to add mid-range and to add this color and warmth that's kind of, quintessential to the sound of the Echoplex. That I wouldn't call a clean boost. I would just say that it's a boost that adds color, and you use it because you want that sound. Whereas a clean boost is like, I'm just adding more volume. I'm not changing the fundamentals of the sound that I set up of the pedals maybe running into the boost. And generally, I think that the clean boost is best suited after any sort of overdrive or distortion pedals. So it's just adding volume. It's not saturating them more. Or if you have an effects loop, using it after the send as a way to, not clip the preamp section of the amp harder, but just add more output going into the power amp, which is less probable to distort, especially if you have a higher headroom amplifier.
See, that's really interesting, because that's not how, I mean, maybe I'm using mine wrong, but the way that I like to use a clean boost is because I always like an amplifier that's just, just on the verge of breakup.
Right.
So when I push on my clean boost, it sort of drives, it just pushes it a little bit further. Is that not the way that you would use it, or?
I think it depends on, again, what your intent is. For a lot of the people that I would work with, they would ordinarily say, and this isn't a universal, this is just sort of a generalization, but a lot of them will say, well, I like the tone that I've developed with this overdrive and this compressor and this whatever combination thereof of sort of gain pedals and sort of dry sound effects. And I just want to take that and I want to turn that into a lead tone, which just takes that sound and then increases the volume. And so when that's the case, using the boost pedal after that, assuming that it's clean and uncolored, as Mike is asking, it's just taking what you've already developed and it's just adding volume. If you were to put that same boost before it, it's going to actually hit the front end of those pedals harder. So it's going to clip them. And if you're just using the boost to add more, or to try to simulate more clipping in the preamp section, whether you do it before or after, it's still going to be adding more volume, but it's going to be adding more saturation. If it's earlier, it's going to be adding more actual volume hitting the amp if you put it after. So you might experiment with it and see what you like, and maybe what you're hearing is actually it clipping whatever overdrive devices you might have on preceding it, preceding the amplifier, but after the boost, and not so much of the boost actually clipping the front end.
Nice. Okay. John Wallace says, hey Mason, nice to see you in another show live. By the way, I'm an owner of the Nile compressor. I love it.
Oh, great. Yeah, it's no longer made, but so he's got one of a limited number of pedals.
Awesome.
The pension plan.
Brad Smith said, digging the amp story. Thanks for sharing. Anytime, mate.
Cool.
It's good. Yeah, it's good, isn't it? Pet says, pedal question for you all. I've just you just bought a 68 Princeton reverb.
Okay.
Pick 3 essential pedals to get started. Boss HM2. No, I'm joking. No, sorry.
Metal Zone. Ovs.
Yeah.
Something with a bit of movement. I'll throw that in to get us started.
Has the Princeton not got tremolo on it? Has Princeton got tremolo? It has.
Yeah.
So would you go from there?
And I'm going to ask the expert. I think Mason's the only person that can answer this.
It's hard to know, the budget, because we could really, inflict some pain here on Pet Moxie. Well, I'll tell you one that I really like with Fender amps, like vintage style Fender amps, is Memory Man's. Except a new Memory Man is so expensive, or if you want to get a original Memory Man but get it now, it's very expensive, and they're also not particularly reliable. But J Rocket has made a replica of the Memory Man called the Clockwork.
Sounds
great, and it is by far the best replica of an original Memory Man, better than the replicas that Electro Harmonix has released. And it's designed by the original designer of the Deluxe Memory Man. And they also have given you a modulation bypass. So in the original Memory Man, you just had to choose if it was going to be chorus or vibrato, and then you had a knob for it, but you couldn't actually remove it fully from the circuit. And this has a separate button for that, so you can completely remove the modulation if you don't want it, or add it back in if you want it. And it just has all of sort of the idiosyncrasies of the original Memory Man, but the reliability of kind of like a newer boutique pedal. And I think that sounds incredible with any sort of Fender amp. I adore it. It looks terrible, but it sounds incredible.
Yeah. It's like he scratched all of the itches that have irritated him about that wonderful original circuit in the new version, isn't it?
If you guys get an opportunity to play one, I highly recommend checking it out. And it's way smaller. I'm trying to see if I have it around here, but the original Memory Man is gigantic, and this is much smaller. So pedalboard friendly. I think that's one of my picks.
Yeah, that Memory Man. I was in a band with the other guitarist. He constantly played through a Vox AC30 with the Memory Man plugged into it, and it was a stunning sound. But isn't there something with the original Memory Mans? When you click it on, you get a volume dip, don't you?
Yeah, you can. And there's guys that have done mods for that. The impedance of the original one was not so optimized for guitar specifically.
Okay.
So there was some issues with that. You actually had a level control available on it on the original one. I'm just looking at the original one I have over here. But it would also tend to clip really easily. So you just kind of had to be aware of that when you were kind of setting it. It had like a little overload indicator light that you could see if it was being overloaded. Right. But this new one seems like it's pretty clean in that regard, and you have a level control where you can compensate for any sort of loss that might be occurring when you engage it.
Come on, Mason. I'm afraid you've got to answer the next two as well.
Okay.
Because yeah, we're learning from you tonight. This is
which of your overdrive pedals would you pair with a Princeton?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think it kind of depends a little bit on the taste of the player, but I generally think with any sort of mid 60s to late 60s Fender, anything with mid range is going to be very pleasing, because that's sort of where it lacks when you try to go for an overdriven sound. So it could be, if you want something really light and not very aggressive and was just kind of like a light breakup, I think the steel string or any of the steel string variations that we have some that have 6 knobs and 2 foot switches, which is like kind of like a multi-channel version, and then we have a more abbreviated one that's just a single foot switch and a couple of controls, and it's kind of more simplified. I think that would be the place to start if you kind of want lower gain and more subtle sort of overdrive. And then if you want something that's a little bit more of like that overdrive double tone, then I think the Ultraphonics would be another good place to start. And then you want kind of something in between. It's not really a popular pedal of ours, but I use it a lot, and I used it a lot when I did that Michael Landau demo of the amplifier last week, which is the Tone Secret, which is essentially a combination of 2 pedals that were used a lot by Michael Landau and Scott Henderson in the 90s, which is the Roger Mayer Voodoo 1 and a Maxon version of a Tube Screamer, like a later version. And so if you listen to Scott Henderson's Torn Down House record, which is kind of his blues record, he's using that same combination into a Fender Showman. Michael Landau used that a lot with Raging Honkies, Burning Water. A lot of those 2 pedals were really instrumental. Tube Screamer, Roger Mayer Voodoo 1. And it's basically the 2 of them in the same box, and then you have some individual controls to sort of manipulate how much of each of them is sort of present in the mix, but they're both always there. And that with a Strat, if you use single coil pickups, I think is a really great sort of medium gain tone, which is just really tasty and has enough brightness where you still really feel like you're playing single coils, but has sort of the roundness of the Tube Screamer and kind of what that imparts to a Fender amp. But I really like that if I'm playing single coil pickups.
Nice.
Brilliant.
Nice. So hope that answers the question, Pet. What does Justin say? Let's have a look. He says, don't know why you would ever do this, but could you load a tube amp down, line out of the load box into a pedal or 2 into a different amp, just for jobbies and cackles? Jobbies and cackles. So you have to excuse our English is it a colloquialism? Would you say
it is indeed? Yeah. Jobby is a Scottish word for something in the bathroom, Mason.
Oh yeah,
yeah. Shits and giggles.
Yeah, there we go.
Got it. Yeah. We'll have a little lookup table by the end of how we can sort of.
Could you do that?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like what he's talking about is just a pretty standard sort of way to do a wet-dry sort of application where, you use either a resistive load, which is a lot of the ways that the early Bradshaw systems were in the 80s, or use the resistive load to load down your dry amp, and then you would feed that into a series of effects. This could be a combination of compressors, of EQs, of different sorts of processing, and then you would feed that into power amps. So you're ostensibly using the amp that's loaded as sort of the preamp section. You're going through a bunch of kind of essentially the load box is essentially like the effects send of like an effects loop. You're going into all of the effects that would sort of come after the preamp, and then those go into a power amp or stereo power amps, and then those feed other speakers. And so you have a loaded down dry signal, and then that's feeding into the wet effects. And so you have essentially a stereo rig, a wet, dry, wet system, but you don't have a cabinet for dry because it's loaded down, then it's pushed into the wet cabinets. So it's sort of like an early incarnation of a wet, dry, wet rig when the dry amp was loaded down instead of on stage with speakers that it was running into.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, that's how the early Van Halen rigs were from Bradshaw. That's how the Lukather rigs were from Bradshaw, the first versions of them. Some of the Buzzy Featon versions were in the 80s.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
David Bro says, Mason, I bought a used Boss FV500H out of a store without noticing the black Vertex sticker on the bottom. Confirmed it with your CS department. I'm still unsure what the mod is. Any ideas?
Yeah, so it depends. We did some, like up until 2014 or so, we did modified Boss FV500 pedals. And essentially what it was doing was really just simplifying the circuit, and it really improved the sonic qualities of it tremendously. The main reason being is that most of the Boss circuits would have a secondary pot that they would use to create a minimum maximum setting on the pedal. So in essence, you could have it where when the heel was back, it wouldn't go all the way to 0. It would go to some preset amount of gain that you would determine. So you could get it to go, let's say, -8 dB when it's in the heel position, and then unity when it's in the toe position instead of silent.
Right.
But just the fact that you had that other resistive, pot is just a variable resistor. You have another resistor in series with the main pot. It sucked the tone out. And so we were doing some experiments with Scott Henderson, because he had been using this FE500 L pedal in his effects loop. And he's like, yeah, they all kind of suck, but I have to use a volume pedal. There's no way around it. So if there's any way that we could figure out how to sort of optimize it, it'd be cool. And so I remember just like sending him a few where I just tried doing different things, where I tried removing that pot. I tried hand wiring one, and just to see what he said. And he's like, when that pot is gone for the minimum maximum thing, that transforms the sound, makes it sound 100 times better, more open, more, reactive with the plane. And so we just started offering, I talked to Boss. I said, hey, this is what we want to do. Would you be willing to sell us FV500s at a dealer cost, because we want to do these mods? And the rep said, yeah, tell us where to send them, and so we would do those and do that change. And I think also on our website, I showed how to do it if you already had a Boss volume pedal, and so you could just do it yourself. It wasn't like a complicated mod. It was just like, it made it sound a lot better, and nobody else was offering anything that looked anything remotely like that. So it wasn't necessarily anything, genius. It was just like, that was just what people thought sounded better when we had sort of sent them a bunch of different options on how they might, want to improve the sound. And this is kind of what a lot of the studio players that we were working with at the time all said was, unanimously better.
Yeah. So following the genius thing then, Mason, what is the most intriguing mod or request you've had from an artist or client where you thought, it's maybe a big tweak or just the tiniest of tweaks of that is a game changer?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of one that was like, I guess I would say that probably, the most interesting ones that also sort of developed into a product is when I was working with Michael Landau in sort of the early 2010s, is the idea of using expression pedals to control features on overdrives.
Okay.
And it started with a pedal that was made by Vemuram called a Janray.
Yeah.
And he had me put a expression jack that would override the volume control on, I think it was the volume control on the Janray pedal.
Right.
And it was just a jack that we would just kind of mount where the battery would ordinarily sit in the pedal. So you couldn't use a battery anymore because you'd have a jack in its place that would kind of be impeding the ability to fit a 9-volt battery in there. But whenever you plugged an expression pedal into it, it basically took over for where the volume pot was. And now the volume pot became the expression pedal. So it wasn't really truly an expression pedal. It was just elongating sort of the internal wiring.
Yeah.
So it was now going out to this
Mm.
volume pot inside of an expression pedal. And it wasn't anything that was like, that anybody who knew how to drill into an enclosure and install a jack couldn't do. I had never thought to do that. And then this ultimately became what informed the Vertex Boost, where it would be a boost if you didn't plug anything into the expression jack. But then when you plugged an expression pedal into it, it would then perform as a takeover for the volume pot. And wherever you set the volume pot would determine how much boost you had available on the expression pedal. So if you set it to, in the middle to 8 dB over unity, the volume pedal would work from silent to 8 dB over unity. And if you moved it up to 16 decibels, it would work again from silent to 16 dB over unity. So that was something that I thought was maybe at the time it seemed insignificant, but sort of informed a feature that was a real differentiator of that product at the time.
Nice. What story?
And I've got a question. Who has been your favorite artist to work with, or favorite guitar player to work with?
Yeah, at the risk of not alienating.
Yeah.
The phone never rings from the other guys anymore.
I mean, I've been really fortunate in that most of the studio guys I was really into, whether it was Paul Jackson Jr. or Michael Landau or Michael Thompson or
hang on.
Really Dean Parks,
Pick
all these
a few
guys.
of those names back up. There we go.
Right. Yeah. That's been really cool just to sort of, get to interact with them, get to hear sort of their stories, what their preferences are, and sort of get to learn their taste profiles. But I would say, like, recently, a person that I was really excited to work with was a guy named Raphael Sadiq. And he was on this album that I really adored for a lot of sort of my formative years as a musician, which was D'Angelo's Voodoo album.
Oh, yeah.
And he was very instrumental with that, and he was really just an interesting guy to do some work for, as a gorgeous studio in Hollywood, and just getting to kind of hang in there, get to talk to him about pedals and some of these classic records, and seeing a lot of these guitars and instruments that he had that were used on a lot of these records, and kind of the stories behind it. That was a really fun experience to be able to get to learn more about, and some of the stories behind a lot of those things that I'd always wondered about, but didn't really have anybody to ask that question to, because it was, either unknown or, in 2000 when that album was made, the internet wasn't as pervasive, so there wasn't so much information about, some of these little idiosyncratic things that I would be interested in as a guitar player.
Yeah. Let's move on to some more sort of some more viewer questions. Adam Loris says, good to see Mason as a guest. And he says, can you have more than one preamp-ish pedal on a board? Automaton and Kingsley Peasant, for example, where do they go? Peasant affects impedance, so after fuzz, but what about the automaton?
I mean, ultimately you can have as many as you want. I mean, I think that the category of preamp to me is sort of like an interesting phenomenon, in that, I think a lot of us manufacturers are categorizing overdrive pedals as preamp. Well, really anything that's in front of the amplifier is a preamp pedal. So I think that maybe the sort of the repurposing of the name has just kind of come to sort of represent maybe like an amp-like tone that is sort of a distortion pedal that may behave somehow like an amp. But anyway, that's my own sort of issue with the naming of it. But to his question, can you have more than one preamp on the pedal? I don't see why you couldn't. And let's see, the automaton and the Kingsley Peasant, for example, where would they go? So I think that as far as their relationship to each other, I think it depends on whether you'd ever use them together. Because a lot of the question that people have about pedal orders, they'll ask about maybe these two really dissimilar pedals and where they should go relative to one another. And then I ask them about would they ever use them together, and they say no. In pending that they don't have, buffers in them, and that they're true bypass, their positions relative to each other is kind of irrelevant unless they're on at the same time, because then one doesn't have any impact on the other. Unless, you know, again, that there was some need for that pedal to be really close to the guitar because of how it might react or something like that. All things being equal, it wouldn't matter. Now let's just pretend, for the sake of argument, that Adam wants to use both of these together. And the automaton is going to be sensitive to impedance because it has a fuzz. I would say put that as close to the guitar as possible. And then, you know, if you want to treat your preamp pedal as an amplifier, I would say further down the line, to me, makes more sense in your overdrive chain, because presumably if you're using other pedals, overdrives, boost, whatever, those are going to be running into the front of the preamp, you know, a preamp section of an amplifier or whatever it may be. So that would be probably my first instinct. But I think ultimately, like, trying this stuff is important, in hearing how they interact with your other effects. And maybe you have some combinations that were sort of, you know, great combinations in your old way of assembling your pedals in your order. And now when you've introduced this new variable, it doesn't work the same way anymore. So, you know, trying things and being open to, you know, not being attached to any one particular way and letting your ears really inform where things should go, I think is an important process. And sometimes, as much as I'd like to do the work for you and say, this is the place that you should put it, ultimately, you know, your ears are going to be the things that should inform the placement and order. So I can give you sort of a framework, but I think ultimately you need to really try it yourself, see what you respond to, because, you know, your hands probably are going to sound different than mine. Your ears are going to be attuned to a different sound than mine. So I can just kind of give you a scaffolding.
And the amount of ground that that automaton covers as well. What is it using it for? You know, there's so many different sounds in it.
Yeah.
Like you say, you've got to put some time in there, Adam, I think, and see what sounds do you like, are you getting out of that thing, that are going to be affected by the peasant if you've got it in after that.
Yeah. I've got to bring up this question here because Mason, I don't know if you know, but as I said earlier, I'm looking for the ultimate amp.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is what the whole series is called. So we've done the two rock, and I've done I've got a matchless.
I saw a matchless,
yeah. I've got the matchless. So the two rock is sold.
Okay.
What is the next amp that I should be trying?
He's inadvertently asking you for a model here.
Yeah.
What's the criteria of the amp that you're looking for?
It's the ultimate amp. It's the it's the amp to. And I think Justin's right. It's basically what I think Justin's saying, that there is no such thing as the ultimate amp. Get 2 or 3 and accept it's horses for courses.
Yeah. I mean, are you looking for like channel switching? It needs to be able to do high gain. It needs to be able to do clean. Like how wide of a spectrum musically does it need to be able to cover?
How wide can you stretch? It needs to be in. Yeah, I know. This is it. I'm looking for vintage. I'm looking for modern.
Okay.
And I don't mind sort of adding pedals for the high gain stuff. Not that I do a hell of a lot of really high gain stuff, but so yeah, it's
so pretty wide spectrum.
Yeah. Or it hasn't got to be. But what's the next? What would you say would be the next one that I should? Well, go and try that flavor.
Yeah. Well, I think as far as like sort of an amp that covers a lot of ground and does it really well, are the custom audio amplifiers from the 90s and 2000s. And those had kind of 3 different key sounds. It was sort of based on the SE3 Plus that Robert Bradshaw had sort of developed with John Suhr in the 90s. And it was supposed to be a twin reverb clean channel, so kind of the standardized Fender twin reverb clean. The second channel was supposed to be more of like a kind of a plexi-ish, but probably more like modded plexi, more bordering on like a JMP 50 or kind of maybe like a slightly hot rodded, 70s Marshall.
Yeah.
And then the high gain was supposed to be more reminiscent of a Soldano SLO.
Okay.
And so it had boost channels available also to pair with those. And depending on the generation of custom audio amplifier you got, you could use that boost channel on all 3 channels. And then on some of the earlier incarnations, it maybe only worked on some of the channels. It had an effects loop and, switchable impedance on the back. So you could use, 4 or 16 or 4, 8 or 16 ohms. And I think that was probably, in my opinion, if you needed one amp that you could do, let's say top 40 music from the last 60 years.
Yeah.
That's probably the amp that could most closely give you those three distinct amp sounds in one box. I think that's probably the best one, but it'll always be a compromise, right? You'll never be able to get a twin reverb clean, a real Marshall Plexi kind of, in a slightly overdriven, broken up tone, and a Soldano SLO in one. It's just, there's no way to do it fully. The closest I ever got to doing something like that, where I had a really nice channel switching amp, was when I was in college. I had a Naylor SD60. I don't know if you remember those amplifiers. They were designed by Dave Friedman and Joe Naylor. And I had a not a twin reverb, I had a deluxe reverb from the 70s. Nice. And I had a EV in the deluxe. And I would put the Naylor head on top of the deluxe, and then at the time, the most sophisticated head switcher that was out was the radial. And so I would use the radial to switch the Naylor into the speaker cabinet of the twin, or of the deluxe. And then when I switched it back, it would just be the deluxe with the EV. And so my overdrive channel was the SD60, and then the clean channel was the deluxe reverb. I had to run a separate delay into the SD60 because it had an effects loop. And that was a pretty glorious clean sound and a pretty glorious overdrive sound. And it required 2 amps to do it. And, now it looks really primitive because there's switchers that can now do this all automatically. But I had this big radial box that would load one down when the other one was being fed the speaker. And that was a pretty good sound for the time. It was a primitive rig, but it was effective.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll check it. The custom audio isn't that so that's Sir, isn't it? So isn't the Pete Thorne 100? Wasn't that taken over from that?
Yeah, that's sort of like the newest generation, and I think Pete's is more modern sounding than the custom audio generation. Like once it became Sir, they didn't make the OD 100 or the SE pluses or any of those anymore. They just made it the Pete Thorne model, and it was sort of the newest evolution of what the custom audio amps were, but they were just the Pete Thorne model. And I think his newest model sounds good unquestionably, but I would actually stay in the versions that came before that were still branded custom audio amplifiers, where they look very sort of industrial. They're black on black with white text. And those, I think, have, if you want Pete's thing, of course his amp's going to be the only one that will do. But if you really want more of a vintagey Marshall sound and that Soldano sound, I think that the OD 100 is going to be more that thing. And they can be had for, I see them, at least in America, I see them used, around $2,000.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not crazy then in relation to what you've been spending on that 2-rock.
No.
Yeah. Those 2-rocks are pricey in the UK.
Yeah.
So there's a question from A. Armedi, says, Mason, what does a buffer do on a pedal board? Thanks.
Yeah, well, it depends on where you put it, but ideally, let's talk about the first place. Usually, you want one first and you want one last on your pedal board, with a few exceptions. If you have a fuzz or some sort of impedance-sensitive pedal, like again, fuzz phase, vintage wah, treble booster, things like that can sometimes be sensitive. But pending those, you want one first and you want one last. And the reason that you want the first one is for a couple of reasons. First reason is you want to load your guitar pickups, presuming you have passive guitar pickups, to react as though they're plugged directly into your amplifier. Because if you take your guitar and you plug into your amplifier has a pretty standardized loading for most tube amps. It's usually 1 meg ohms. And you want your guitar pickups to behave as though they're plugged right into your amplifier. Again, this is presuming you want your guitar to still sound like it's plugged into an amp, even though it's running through a series of pedals. There may be some people that don't like the sound of their amplifier naturally, and they want to modify that. So maybe they don't want to use a buffer, or they want to go about it some other way. But all things being equal, the input buffer is designed to load your guitar so that it resembles the same way that it would see what the signal is if it was plugged into the amplifier. And then on the output of that buffer, it converts it to low impedance. And I think that an easy way to maybe just understand impedance, just as like a, you know, really sort of pedestrian explanation would just be when we're talking about it, impedance is just like how sensitive is the signal that we're talking about. If it's really high impedance, it means it's really sensitive. If it's low impedance, it means it's not that sensitive. So on the output, it's making it sort of completely impervious to whatever's coming after it because it's not sensitive to anything, really low impedance, and that's going to be driving through all the pedals. That is until you either one, turn on a pedal, because any pedal that's on then becomes the buffer from that point forward, or two, you hit another pedal that has a buffer, and then that becomes the buffer from that point forward, which is why it is now imperative to also have a buffer at the end, because we don't know the quality of the buffering or the pedals that are turned on in between the input buffer and the output buffer, because there's no standards in pedals. Some of them can be great. They'll be 100 ohms, which is a nice low output impedance. And some of them can be 10K ohms or even higher than that. And so why the output buffer becomes important is no matter what pedals are on in the series of pedals, we've controlled the pickups on the input. We've converted to low impedance of that input buffer, but we've changed impedances maybe 5 or 6 times throughout the pedal board, depending on what pedals are on and how many buffers there are on there and other pedals.
Sure.
So we put another one at the end to ensure that no matter what combination of pedals are on, we've converted again to low impedance so that we can drive that long line. And usually the longest line in our series of pedals is the last cable that goes back to the amplifier, so that we can ensure that no matter how disrupted the signal has been, we know that by the time it reaches the end of the pedal board, it's going to be back at low impedance, and it's going to drive that line all the way back to the amp with as little to no change as possible. So that's why we want both of them on the pedal board, so that we can kind of act the buffer sort of like a firewall, and it's isolating whatever's on the pedal board separately from the amplifier and the guitar separately from the pedal board.
It's intriguing. Great explanation, by the way.
Thank you.
We spend so much time talking about this delay, that overdrive, and everything else. Buffers aren't exactly the sexiest thing in the guitar world.
No,
they're important, aren't they?
They are. It's sort of, you know, like when you do like work on your house, you know, you have to do like the foundation or something like that. Like you don't get to see it. It's not like doing a bathroom or a kitchen remodel. You know, it's like, it's the thing that you don't, you know, you spend money on and you don't get to see it. And so it's hard to justify the expense. But yeah, you know, we spend all this money, you're spending money on 3 Strymon pedals, you know, and then you have this suboptimal buffering. It's sort of like you spend $1,000 on pedals, and then you're just, you know, you're kind of ending a little bit prematurely by not just adding in those extra quality buffers.
And can I ask a question there as well then? Because on the match list that I've got, I think all match lists are like this. It's an unbuffered effects loop.
Yeah.
So what is the best way of, is that the same thing? So do you, if you want to run like a reverb pedal in the effects loops, you go buffer before, reverb pedal, buffer afterwards?
It's a little different for effects loops because the level that's coming out is so much higher than when you're in the front of the amp. So ordinarily on a passive loop, again, no standards here amongst amplifier builders. There's no, you know, like amplifier builder summit where we all, you know, come up and agree on what impedances are going to run or anything. But normally it's coming out line level. So, you know, it's pretty hot compared to instrument level. And a lot of pedals can't even accept that without clipping, depending on what kind of delay or things like that you're going to use. So in order to properly buffer that, you kind of need an effects loop style buffer. This is what Dumble had on his amps called a Dumbulator, which is basically taking that line level and you had a send volume and a return volume. So you could attenuate the signal that was going to hit the pedals in the loop and it would buffer it. And then you could make that gain up on the output to bring it back up to line level when it was coming back into the amp. And there's other devices now that are a lot smaller that do a similar thing. I think the best one for the money is called a clinulator, and it's about the size of an MXR flanger, like the vintage MXR flangers. And it's got a send and return on it, and it's got an input and an output on it. So you would connect it on the back of your amp or on top of your amp, and you'd have the send go into the input. You know, the send of the matchless would go into the input of this thing. The return of the matchless would go into the output. And then this box has a new send and return, which then would go back and forth to your pedal board, which buffers the send. So the pedal board is getting now this low impedance signal. And then on the pedal board, you would probably want to buffer the return going back to the amplifier, and then you can attenuate that down so that it gets back to the appropriate level for the amplifier. And so you have, you know, 2 different gain controls to basically adjust how hot the signal is that's going to the pedals, and then how hot the signal needs to be coming back into the amplifier in order to make it sound as though it's as transparent as possible.
But why, when you're buying, like, if you're buying an expensive high-end boutique style amplifier, why don't they do that anyway? Why don't they, because obviously these things aren't hideously expensive. I'm guessing the Klein later isn't going to be.
It's maybe $150 or something like that. Well, I think there's a couple reasons. I think in the case of like Two Rock or something like that, I think that they're, in some of their models, they're really trying to have fidelity to sort of a Dumble style amplifier, and for the most part, Dumble's never included an effects loop, or at least to my knowledge, they never did. And the Dumbleator was sort of the way that you would create an active effects loop out of a passive one.
Got it.
I think on other amplifiers, it could be, you know, the expense to put it in there. It could be a limitation of the designer to not know how to insert it properly without affecting the sound. You know, I think that in the reality of adding effects loops, going solid state is actually preferable to tube on the effects loop side of it. Mostly because adding another tube adds color, you know, and it also will add noise to the system. And so if you want whatever's in the effects loop to be as transparent as possible, so that the amp isn't being colored by the addition of the effects loop, it's just being colored by however you've set the controls of the amplifier, that doing in like an op amp based effects loop is actually preferable as far as the buffering is concerned. And there's some companies that do high end additions. Like I think a good one that they have a DIY kit for that you can add to some amplifiers is made by Metropolis.
Yeah.
And he has what I think it's called like a no loss effects loop, and it's a solid state loop, and it's a very high quality effects loop, and it's relatively inexpensive. And I think that even companies that, you know, could do that, they could do that relatively inexpensively. I wonder if it's just like another hoop for them to jump through, and maybe something that they don't see that's highly utilized in their circuits or their amps. I mean, I can't speak to other manufacturers. In our amp, it doesn't have an effects loop because the amp doesn't generate any gain. So there's really no value for an effects loop unless the amp is producing distortion.
Sure. Understood.
Yeah.
Understood. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Odds UK, do you mind if we answer that question next week? And I go on because we're trying to sort of concentrate on the questions for Mason, but great question. Ask it next week, and we'll definitely get to that. Jeff Rock says, "Hi Mason. In relation to the number of pedals on a board, at what point would you recommend getting a switcher? Also, is there a reverb you recommend that works well in front of a crunchy amp?" That's a really good question.
Okay, so number of pedals on the board to necessitate a switcher. Well, I think that it can be, you can still make a really good sounding board that has 10 or 12 pedals that doesn't use a switcher. And we had a video probably about a year ago where we had a similarly equipped pedal board with a switcher and without a switcher, and compared sort of the transparency of them against each other. And it was fairly close. And again, because they weren't the exact same pedals, there could be some of this chalked up to, you know, the impedances of some of the different pedals or the buffers that were in the pedals themselves, that, you know, the switcher obviously with everything off would be bypassing, whereas in the pedal board that's all serial pedals, that would have, you know, an introduction of a greater number of buffers. But I would say that, you know, the reason to get a switcher, I wouldn't say is because of a tone perspective. I say the reason to get a switcher is to make your workflow better. Because, you know, I've seen some guys like Tom Bukovac in Nashville, for example, who has a pretty, you know, it's pretty big. It's like a door, you know, it's a large pedal board, and it's all serialized, and there's no, you know, particular methodology to bypassing every pedal or anything like that. And he gets unquestionably some amazing tones out of it, and it's relatively low noise. And I think if you're observing some of the fundamentals of good pedal board building, where you're using a quality power supply that's isolated, you're using soldered cables, you're using high quality buffers in the right places, you know, first and last, you can mitigate a lot of the noise issues that are associated or that a lot of people attribute. And I think that what ended up happening a lot with switchers and even true bypass loopers to a degree is that people had problems that pre-existed the introduction of the switcher, but what the switcher did is just isolated their problems behind sort of the firewall of the switcher. And so it didn't actually address any of the symptoms of what was going on with the pedal board. They could just now bypass it, and the noise would only be present maybe when they were playing, and the volume of the guitar is such that it would, supersede the noise floor that was present of a problematic cable or, dirty pots or, fill in the blank reason that you could have noise on the pedal board. And so I really think that you get a switcher because you want to improve your workflow. If you're a live performing musician, you're having to cover, let's say, 40 different songs a night in a cover band. You can have, a really easy workflow to create, a flow chart of what, presets represent each song. And you can have a button for the intro section and the bridge and the chorus and your solo and the outro. And it can all be pre-programmed for you. I think that that's the advantage of doing that. I don't think the advantage is for a sonic purpose, because again, all things being equal, you're observing sort of those tenets of building a good pedal board. I think you can get something that's quiet and sounds great and doesn't have to have a switcher in order to get there.
Yeah.
And then the second part of that was reverb that works well into the front of a crunchy amp. This is going to be an uncool answer, but the Fender reverb that Boss put out, I think it was called the FRV1.
Yeah,
it's like a spring reverb emulator. It's digital, and all the rockabilly guys here, at least in California, are really into it. And I was introduced to it by this rockabilly guy named Deke Dickerson, and a lot of guys, even RJ Ronquillo uses it a lot, another YouTuber. And that thing is incredible, and it sounds great into a dirty amp. And very authentic sounding.
Awesome.
Nice.
Yeah.
Right, we've got loads of questions and not a lot of time. So I'm just going to pick. a couple.
I'll be here for as long as you guys are willing to go.
Let's go on a bit longer. Adam Loris said, "Love the 2-Rock. What's the budget version of it? £1,000 to £2,000. So up to $2,500. Nice. What would you say?
I wonder if they're talking about like an overdrive type, like Dumble-y sound, or if you just want like a clean, because I think that a great clean tone can be that's reminiscent of what 2-Rock is rooted in and Dumble is rooted in as a consequence is getting a Fender amp, will have those properties, especially get a nice vintage Fender amp. You could go with a more British sounding speaker, which is something that Dumble and 2-Rock both did. They, utilize Celestions or versions of Celestions, just like we did with our version. I think the Seriatone ones are really great for the money, and those are really quality kits. And even the ones that the owner that builds with his team, I've seen several of them, and they're great. They're really well built, and I think unquestionably for the amount of money that they are, they're wonderful amps. And then again, I'll tell you who makes a wonderful amp that has a lot of that Dumble sound is the Rivera era Fenders from the 80s.
I sat next to one.
Yeah. The Concerts are really great amps. Those came stock for a period of time with EVM 12Ls. Has a buffered effects loop, has 2 channels with an actual usable gain channel. It's not too over the top. It's a little more subtle. And that's an incredible amp. And those are very inexpensive, like probably under £1,000. And that's a real sleeper Fender. It's still hand wired, has checks all the boxes that you'd want of a boutique amplifier. But it's not made in the mid 60s. It was made in the early 80s. But you get an EV speaker, you get channel switching, you get a 2 buffered effects loop.
Still get a nice reverb.
Beautiful reverb. And I would say that's if I were to do another video on sleeper Fender amps, I think the second one would be the Rivera era concert Fenders.
Nice.
I'm writing that down.
Nice. Yeah. Reverb has just sold them all, Mason.
Concert. All right, Fender. Yeah. Nice. I'm just going to sort of pick random questions. Sorry, guys, if we don't get around to your questions. Yeah. So John Gordon says, I thought this is quite a good one because and I love questions that some people think are dumb questions, and they're definitely not dumb questions because there isn't a dumb question. But he says, sorry for the dumb question, but what is Unity? I hear it used a lot, but not sure what it is.
Yeah, wasn't it a Rick James song?
Yeah.
I think it was.
I think it means that Unity gain.
Yeah. So usually when we say Unity, it's like whatever the volume is that you've set the amplifier to. If you've attenuated, let's say, with a volume pedal, and then coming back to Unity, like when I used that term earlier today, is basically just meaning that you're getting back to the same volume that the amplifier was at. If you've either brought it back and attenuated it with a volume pedal, or you've rolled down the volume on your guitar, and then you're bringing it back to sort of the baseline level with which the amp was set. We'll use that term that we get back to unity gain, sort of like the baseline established gain that the signal is.
Awesome. Safey says, why are some components like vintage chips and germanium transistors or diodes so hard to reach when there is so much demand for pedals? That's a really good question.
Why are some components like vintage and germanium transistors or diodes so hard to reach? I guess he's asking in terms of availability, or I just want to make sure what's your read on the question?
Why aren't they made anymore? I guess why when there's such a demand for pedals are these are there certain components that probably aren't that aren't made anymore when there's such a demand for it?
Yeah, well, I think that maybe the misnomer is that most of those components weren't designed for the guitar pedal market. They were used in hundreds of other consumer electronics, and then just guitar pedal companies were buying them and using them in guitar pedals. So it wasn't as though these were markets that were designed specifically for guitar and amplifier usage, and then they just stopped making them. It was because we were maybe less than 1% of the market, and all these other companies that were using them for consumer electronics, they moved on to a more efficient technology. And so there was no reason for companies to continue to make a Redicon chip, or to make silicon or germanium transistors. And so now, we're sort of seeing maybe some holdovers that are probably making some for pedal companies, and maybe a few other types of companies that maybe are completely dissimilar to guitar pedals or amps, that maybe are still reproducing a few of these things. And in some cases, you do see some pedal specific applications. Like there's a company in China called XV or Xvive that makes bucket brigade chips. Right. But they're way more expensive in relative cost than what those chips ever cost in the 80s when they originally came out. They're definitely charging a premium because there's not enough guitar pedal companies to make it so that they can lower the cost to the degree where it's affordable to use them. So companies like Chase Bliss and others that make analog delays still that would utilize, let's say, a bucket brigade chip. They're paying a huge premium to use these, sort of new production. So I would say that they're hard because there's not a lot of crossover anymore as there was before, and those parts were easy to get back in the 1960s because everybody was using them across multiple different industries. And now there's no reason for most companies to use a germanium diode or any of that stuff. So there's still companies in Russia that make some of this stuff, like a lot of the transistors and stuff like that. You can get them, but they're more expensive. They're not as good as they used to be. And if you can find vintage ones still, most of them have already been graded out. When you buy a lot of old germanium transistors or whatever it is, you're for the most part you're getting what 50 other brands have already gone through, sorted the gains on all of them, and they've determined that these are not within a range that's acceptable to use for a product. And so they kind of threw them back into the pile, and so you're sort of buying sort of the rejects of multiple different companies' processes to sort of sort through, in quality control the parts. So for the most part, NOS stuff is pretty, it's pretty unusable for the most part. Maybe you can find 25%, if you were really lucky, maybe 50% that would be usable for something like this. But just because it says NOS doesn't mean that it's good.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. K. Michael P says, Mason, ship a doctor to Paul. I don't know if he means an actual doctor. He probably means an actual doctor. So David Bro says, there you go, Paul, your next amp is a Dumble. There we go.
Yeah. Well,
that'd be nice.
Something very similar.
They're going up in price, I'm sure.
Yeah, bless him. I think after, was it last week, the week before?
Last week. Yeah. The thing is, I mean, I know that they're still rare. The amps are still rare,
sure.
But in the UK, I've never even seen one.
I think that Mick had one. Yeah. When he was working for the magazine, or does he still work for the magazine? I don't know.
No.
Because they had done some reviews, and he had that one that
snakeskin one or something.
Yeah, it was from Mr. Mister, I think. I think it was the Steve Ferris one.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, and so I know that he had that one. I presume that he didn't come to the United States for that. I would presume it came to him.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Here we go. We've got a couple more. This is interesting because a rival sort of company. I'm curious if Mason has any opinions on the gig rig power supply. It seems to be a unique solution from other power supplies. I'm concerned about reliability.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a switch mode power supply, so that's kind of, I think, a better way to go for the types of pedals that are around now, and that's dissimilar from a linear power supply, which is kind of the old school like Voodoo Lab pedal power series, or the pedal power 1 and 2 series, where it uses a toroid transformer. So this is a different technology, but works better for efficiency purposes for higher current pedals. So I think in that regard, it's a good alternative. I think that the drawbacks are that it's sort of a disaggregated solution. So you have to buy modules to expand out the different voltages, and if you want to sort of push it out into multiple different outputs, you have to sort of expand it incrementally in order to do it. There's no soldering of the connections. I think it's sort of just like kind of clip like a speaker wire would be in an old hi-fi system, if you were going to just kind of like a tensioned sort of like push button piece that you insert the wire into, and then it kind of tensions in. And I know that there's people that have had a lot of success with it, and a lot of people really like it. I've only seen one once in my career. I don't think a lot of them end up here in the US. And so I think just for that reason of just distance, I don't see a lot of them. But I can see that from a consumer standpoint, in being able to customize things easily. You don't have to have any pre-existing skills to cut the wire down, splice it, and then insert the positive and negative side into, the clamp. So I think for some people that's advantageous. I would say if you're concerned about reliability or just the efficacy of the power supply, I don't think there's any advantage of using that over something like a Chalks or a Strymon or a True Tone or sort of fill in the blank high quality power supply. I think it comes down, I think, to your willingness to be able to DIY it, and whether you want to sort of have all these separate modules and all that stuff. But I think as far as the quality of the supplier, like the voltage that it delivers, there's certainly other ways to get there.
It is a remarkably simple system to put together. I say that purely from experience, and in terms of the reliability. Granted, it's a while back since I was a gigging, jobbing musician, but up and down the country, I never had it fail once. But then there's that other part of another one of those things we've touched on, buffers and effects loops. It's one of those things that isn't necessarily sexy about getting your rig together, is it? But like God's, it's important, isn't it? You've got to make a good choice. If you're going to spend over here, the automaton is the fat end of £1,000 sterling. Mason.
Yeah.
I guess it's
Yeah.
similarly priced over there, just in
Right.
the US.
Yeah.
You know, if you're going to spend that amount of money on a bit of kit like that, please God, spend some money on the power supply for it as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
a $5 wall wart.
Right. Yeah.
And I've got another question. Probably going to be the last question of the night, actually. But and I see you're quite a big advocate for soldered cables as opposed to non. What are they called? Non-soldered, solderless.
Yeah.
That's the word. Cables, and because Dan from the Gig Rig, he's quite into the solderless cables, and you're very much focused on the solderless. So what's your reasoning behind that?
Well, science for one, but you know, I think that even Dan and I are friendly, and we'll text, offline from time to time, and even he will admit that, as far as if the quality of the connection of a soldered connection is superior. But I think his sort of justification, and I'm paraphrasing it here in an analogy, but it's sort of like, well, if the speed limit is only 65 miles per hour, do we really need something that's rated to 100 miles an hour? Right. And for him, in his workflow, it's faster for him to be able to assemble in this fashion.
Right.
And so I think that's the style with which he works. Now, I don't know. Of course, I know that he's built rigs for high profile players and stuff like that. I don't know how often or reoccurring that is for him, because I don't know the details of his business. But what I can say is that if you sort of look historically at any of the legacy builders, whether it's Pete Cornish or Robert Bradshaw or Dave Friedman or any of these guys, you'll never ever see them use a solderless connection, because it's just a what if that they can't explore with their customer once that rack or once that pedal board is on the road and it's got a 150-day tour. They just know that they have to stack the deck in their favor to the degree that it's possible. And when you solder a connection, it is gas tight, presuming that it's done properly. Whereas solderless, irrespective of what the manufacturers say, and I've pressed some of them on this that have made this claim, that there is no such thing currently as a gas tight solder connection for a guitar pedal application. And the argument that a lot of them will try to make is they'll take it to a non-audio specific context, and they'll say, well, in a NASA spaceship, they use solderless connections. And I'll say that's true, but they're using a calibrated system that's literally cold welding the connections together because it's crimped at some insane, amount of force, where it's actually merging the two metal substrates together. And that's just not what we have available to us. And nobody would pay for the incremental cost increase in order to make that possible for a solderless cable. So for now, it's not a one-to-one comparison in terms of the quality of the connection. I have no qualms about the cable. Evidence audio cable is a very well-made cable, and a lot of people love how it sounds. And if you like the quality of the cable and you like the sound, you should absolutely use it. But if you want the reliability or the most reliability, you'll do better to solder it than you would to use a solderless connection. And that goes for any of the solderless cable manufacturers, whether it be Georgel or, again, Evidence or Lava or fill in the blank company. I have no problem with the quality of the cable. It's the connections, which is where they're lacking relative to their soldered counterparts.
Great.
There you go.
Nice.
Nice one. Well, I guess that's us done. Mason, thanks so much for joining us, and
my pleasure,
filling us in with all your wonderful information.
It's been wonderful. Yeah.
And to be honest, I've got millions. I've got so many more questions. I'm sure you have, Greg.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't started on the list that I put together, but I'm so pleased that we've spent as much time as we have talking about the unsexy parts of a pedalboard rig, because it does make such a big difference, doesn't it? So I'm glad that my train of thought is in the same way as a man who absolutely knows his onions. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to explore it more in the future. Or, you know,
well, yeah. Hopefully, when customs pull their finger out over here and Paul actually gets some pedals, we'll be able to do a round two.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Is there a way? Yeah, if possible, could you come on again in a certain amount of time, whenever's convenient for you? And
absolutely.
I've got loads more questions, and I'm sure everyone else does as well. We hardly got through any of it.
Maybe even see if we can get James in the same room for a change as well.
Well, if he decides to turn up for once. Right, so I guess that's us done. So thanks for joining us, Mason. Again, thanks so much for coming on the show. Greg, thanks for standing in for for Mr. Late.
Absolutely, my honour. When the opportunity came up to get this close to getting first hand chat with you, Mason, and I couldn't get on quick enough. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks, guys, and we'll see everyone next week. Cheers, guys.
Bye.